If you live in the north and you don't want the gardening season to end in November, by the end of this video, I'm going to show you what crops to plant, when to plant them, how to protect them through below zero, and how to harvest them all winter long. I'm Zach Buckle, owner of Farm Table West, where we currently have $14,545 worth of fresh food to harvest through our winter. That's over 2,400 pounds of fresh food available through our Wyoming winter that averages extreme low temperatures of -20 degrees Fahrenheit. If you want to grow your own food, check out my free garden starter guide at the link in the description below. Okay, so when it comes to what crops to plant, I am not talking about tomatoes, I am not talking about cucumbers, I am not talking about zucchini. None of that stuff's gonna work in this system at all. I am only talking about the most cold hardy crops on earth, basically. And this is one of the coldest tolerant crops on earth. This is called Claytonia. And this is native to Wyoming, actually. This grows in the mountains around here. I've had ranchers come to my booth and tell me that they recognize this crop. It's also known as miner's lettuce. If you want to Google that, it's kind of a fun little rabbit hole. This is the toughest of any of the greens other than spinach. But what I'm talking about is only the toughest crops. And some of this is going to depend on your climate. I'm in a really tough climate. I'm basically in Siberia. You know, we're supposed to be a zone 5A, but I really think it's a zone 4B, zone 4, because on average, our temperatures are colder than zone 5. You know, a lot of that's just splitting hairs, but you know, we're getting below zero all the time in the wintertime. So it's very extreme. -20, almost a guarantee every winter for like a week or two. But all the crops that I'm talking about in this video will survive that. So my examples that I use every winter are Tokyo Bacana salad mix, which is what you're looking at here. This is probably on the middle scale of cold tolerance. It's not the toughest, but we use it as a salad mix because it's tougher than lettuce. Spinach, number one, gotta grow spinach. That's all over this greenhouse. Claytonia, like I mentioned earlier, we got 2 beds of that. Carrots, bomb-proof. We've had those survive -30, and they're still pretty edible. Kale, so full-sized kale. We'll show you that later in this video. Baby kale. Arugula is not bad, but it's not super tough. Parsley is extremely tough in my experience. That's as tough as Tokyo Bacana, if not tougher. Green onions, somewhat bok choy, somewhat celery. I don't really consider those winter crops. It's more of a fall crop that I'm pushing late into the season. But that's your core group of winter crops. And if you combine that with storage crops, like I've talked about in some of my other videos, you have a pretty nice array of food to be eating all winter long and not even have to go to the store. So I'm really talking about only tough crops. Like I mentioned, the planting schedule that I'm going to put in the link in the description is going to give you some more ideas. There's a couple more out there. And if you're in a zone 5 or a zone 6, you probably can bump up a few more other crops like broccoli maybe. You can add some more in there. We're in extreme, so I only focus on the absolute toughest because that's what's going to make my business work. But I'm sure that I'm going to learn more as I keep doing this. This is my 4th year doing this, producing food in the wintertime. And it's a learning curve every year. It's very new. There's not a lot of people out there talking about this, which is why I'm making this very video. So that's the crops I would focus on if you are interested in starting this. Okay, so the most important part of success with winter growing is when to plant. So I have a really strict planting schedule for everything you see in this greenhouse. And I'm going to demonstrate how important it is by showing you this bed of kale and this bed of kale over here. We transplanted them too late. So they're slightly under mature. I'm still not too worried about it. We're going to get like half the amount of kale that I hoped for, but you know, that's better than nothing. But you want the crops to be fully mature by the last 10-hour day in your climate/growing zone. And for us here in Wyoming, that's November 7th, which is today. So today is when technically all these plants are going to stop growing. And that's what's called the beginning of the Persephone period. If you Google a guy named Elliot Coleman, you'll learn all about the Persephone period. He's the guy who's really pioneered this method in America, at least. And so everything we got is pretty much mature, and all we have to do now is protect it and use it as inventory for the rest of the winter. So there's a really intense planting schedule. I'm going to put it at the link in the description. There's going to be a link to Johnny's Seeds Winter Growing Guide, where you basically plug in your last 10-hour day. You just have to Google that, last 10-hour day in your city, state, all that good stuff, and it will tell you. And you basically plant X amount of weeks before that. So for example, the carrots in here, we've got 3 beds. There's 2 covered in row cover there, and 1 over here. We planted them August 1st. I know from 3-4 years of experience, that's the date to plant them in my climate under a greenhouse. And they're perfectly mature every single time, as long as you get them to germinate right and you're good at growing carrots in the first place. So that's a really critical time for us, because August is a really busy time on the farm. We're harvesting at full production. It's crazy busy. So it's hard to focus on that. But if you stay disciplined with the planting 2 crops a year concept that I talk about in a lot of my videos, it's obviously worth it, because we have basically 900 pounds of carrots in the ground to harvest through the winter now, on top of the storage carrots we already have in our cooler. So we have a lot of carrots because we're really disciplined with that. So it's worth it to do this. And parsley, we actually seeded this parsley back in June. Parsley takes that long to start growing, and it is an absolute jungle. These actually might be too big, but they're looking great, and it was ridiculously cold last night. It was 15 degrees for like 6 hours. And I think we did get our celery damaged a little bit. You know, you live and you learn. Some of it's damaged on the end walls. Celery is not very tough, but there's a whole schedule for everything. Stuff like baby kale, like we have over here, is going to be very fast. You plant that in late August, but the schedule is really important, because it calculates the decrease in daylight hours, which makes things grow slower no matter what. You know, so you have to account for that, and it accounts for a greenhouse protection. Things just grow better in a greenhouse. So the timing is really critical. It's really going to just be coming down to you looking at that planting schedule at the link in the description and planning it all out as you have space open in your greenhouse or your cold frame or garden, whatever you're doing. Plant according to those dates, and it should work. So you need to have the greenhouse protection, though, because otherwise it's different than fall planting. You know, fall planting is you're planting based on outside growing conditions. Winter planting is based on greenhouse growing conditions. So it's the same concept, but under a greenhouse, things grow faster and deeper into the winter. So you can't plant carrots for fall crop August 1st outside in my climate. They need to be July 1st. So there's a whole rabbit hole to that. It's just real simple if you stick to that planting schedule, though. And I've done that religiously the last couple years, and I found it to be pretty accurate. And I'm constantly making adjustments just based on what I see, because sometimes it's not 100% right. There's a whole bunch of factors to it, but in general, if you stick to that planting schedule, you're going to do pretty well. But it's really all about the timing, because all these crops pretty much have a 2 to 3 week window to plant for winter. So if you get it wrong, you're in trouble, you know, if you're banking on winter crops. Okay, so now you have your crops mature by November 7th. Now I'm going to show you how to protect them so they stay good all winter long. And basically that just means adding an additional layer of protection as the weather gets colder. And I'm really talking about doing this all in the context of some kind of greenhouse. Now, a greenhouse can be a high tunnel like this. It could be a caterpillar tunnel like I showed you earlier. And it could be a cold frame, which is a small greenhouse that is basically just a couple of pieces of wood with a piece of glass on top of it, or a low tunnel, which is basically a piece of EMT conduit, just like this stuff up here that's bent into a half circle. You stick it over 2 beds and use that as a frame for covering your crops with 1 layer of plastic. That doesn't work very well because of wind. I don't really recommend that, but you could Google low tunnels and you'll see what I mean on how to do that. My number one recommendation for you as a homesteader, gardener, or even a farmer is the Caterpillar tunnels that are in the earlier parts of this video. Those are the best bang for your buck greenhouse out there that will withstand pretty extreme wind conditions and stuff. The Caterpillar tunnels I have, we've only been using them for a little over a year here on the farm, but we're in Wyoming. Winds are crazy here. You know, they've already withstood 35-mile-an-hour winds, and I just upgraded the end walls so they won't flap around at the end at all, and I bet it'll withstand like 50-mile-an-hour winds now. And those are $1,500 to $3,000 for just a homestead version of what I have. It's very easy to build. These high tunnels take 100 hours to build at least. Much more work involved. Those are really cheap, really easy to build, and if you factor in what the cost of a root cellar is, a real root cellar is an underground root cellar to store your storage crops for the winter is anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 to put in. That is $1,500 to $3,000, and you could have all of your storage crops growing or harvestable in there to be inventory for you all winter. And so anyway, the way to protect them is you got 1 layer of greenhouse plastic in the methods that I mentioned earlier. Then as the temperatures get colder, you want to be paying attention to the weather. And once you see temperatures down to like 15 degrees at night in the forecast, you'll want to start protecting all the crops I mentioned with 1 layer of this, which is row cover. I'm going to put a link to Farmer's Friend in the description where you could buy the Caterpillar tunnels and you could buy this row cover stuff. This is basically another layer of greenhouse protection. And you just keep adding more layers of this as the weather gets colder, and it basically works. None of this is an exact science. I'm still learning it, and there's not a lot of data out there in my context, so I've kind of just been figuring it out as I go. But basically this does work, especially for stuff like spinach. It's bomb-proof for spinach. I haven't covered this spinach at all. Well, actually we have covered it a little bit, but this spinach will be good for -20, -30, no problem. Certain crops I mentioned won't survive. There's going to be damage, but the spinach, Claytonia, carrots, I've had all survive -30 degrees Fahrenheit with this method without much problem at all. There was some damage to the carrots. There were a little bit crunchy is the right word. The texture gets changed a little bit when they get that cold and the ground is frozen solid, but they do recover and they're pretty edible. You know, it's better than the stuff at the store for sure. And so the spinach and the Claytonia for sure survives, and it will regrow in February and March, which is what you really want, because that means you not only get this first cut, which we're looking at right here, but you get 2 cuts, twice the amount of food. And I don't always bank on that just because some things go wrong. Stuff like the Tokyo Bacana will probably not get a second cut. It just doesn't last the extreme colds as well as the other stuff. But as you slowly get colder temperatures, add another layer, and the plants ultimately get hardened off and tougher and will survive through the winter. And that's basically it. That's all I do. You know, you can get fancy with greenhouses, do geothermal heating, propane heating, all that good stuff, but that costs a lot of money. And so this is a really cheap, easy way to do it. All you got to do is occasionally pay attention to the weather. You know, you do want to take the frost covers off. You know, right now we have about 10 days forecast where the weather is only going to be like 28 degrees at night. That's pretty nice for winter. But last night we got down to 15 degrees and I could actually tell we got some damage on some stuff. It was a really cold night for November. Actually not that cold for around here, but it did damage some stuff because I didn't double cover things, and I probably should have. But the next 10 days are looking really good, so you do want to let these things breathe. I've had problems in the past where if you leave the frost covers on for too long, they will rot the greens, especially Tokyo Bakana. Spinach is a little more tough, but you want to let these things breathe because humidity and moisture is going to rot your plants, especially in the winter. There's no evaporation in the wintertime. So you do want to let them breathe. You know, occasionally you want to open up your greenhouse doors, let that humidity out. It's a big deal with keeping the things going. But, you know, worst case scenario, if you get some damage on your spinach, your Claytonia, your arugula, whatever happens, if the plant dies, it dies. Then you don't get a second cut. But almost guaranteed with spinach and Claytonia, you will get 2 cuts. So you might not have fresh greens to eat for a month or something if you get a really extreme cold weather event. You know, I've had that happen. I pretty much planned the farm to have a nice month-long gap where we're not able to harvest anything just in case, because it's pretty extreme here. But once you hit the end of the Persephone period, which for us is February 4th, our Persephone period is November 7th through November 4th, stuff starts to regrow and you should start getting a second cut and it just starts to explode. It's not just a second cut, you'll probably get 3. Because the growth explodes because the roots are so well established, they've survived all winter, and you're going to have way more than you can eat at once. That's where you're going to have that bumper crop of all these greens because they're all going to be growing at once. You probably won't be able to eat them all, but it's a nice added bonus to this whole concept. So you're really getting 2 crops for the price of 1 with all the greens that I'm mentioning, you know, except for the carrots and green onions and stuff, but the greens like spinach, Claytonia, bomb-proof. So basically, you just use this row cover, you cover it just like this. 1 layer, 15 degrees, 2 layers, below 0, 3 layers, below -10, -20. And basically at that point, you just pray because sometimes it just doesn't work. But most of the time, this is gonna work, you know, and I'm guessing most of you watching are probably in a warmer climate than me. This is a pretty extreme climate. I think even a lot of Canada is not as cold as us. And that's basically it. So you just gotta kind of practice this, and you know, it doesn't really take me that long to cover this whole bed with that fabric, and I don't do it every day. It's like once I just watch the weather and kind of watch the patterns. If I see some extreme cold coming up, I'll cover them. And then when I see some nice weather coming, I'll take it off and let them breathe a little bit and stay healthy. And then as you harvest them, they're not going to rot at all. They will be protected much easier. Basically, the bigger the plants are, the harder they are to protect. So I like it when the greens are like this size. If they're bigger than this, there's a lot more rotting that happens, and there's a lot less evaporation that's able to happen, so they rot worse. So this is like the perfect size, and that all comes down to your timing. You got to keep track of that every year. But the smaller the plants are, the better they're going to survive in general. Here's how I want you to think about harvesting this food. This is how I look at it on the farm. Everything that you've seen in this whole video is inventory. It's just like a root cellar to me, only better in my opinion, because you can't store salad greens in a root cellar really for months and months and months. Everything is mature. All I'm doing is protecting it and harvesting it when I want. And so I don't need a root cellar. This greenhouse is my root cellar. And I'll mention this again. If you Google the average cost of an in-ground root cellar, it's $10,000 to $50,000. This Caterpillar tunnel, if you were to buy a 25-foot version of this exact tunnel, it's about $1,500. If you bought a 50-foot version, it's about $2,800 or maybe $3,000. So do the math on that. It's quite a bit cheaper. So this method of food storage, which I've kind of talked about in a couple of previous videos for the outside, this is just the same thing, doing it under greenhouse plastic and protection. and it lasts all winter, this method provides you tons of food for a lot less work than canning or freezing or any of the other food preservation methods out there. I have 900 pounds of carrots that are in the ground that I just harvest whenever I want through the winter. And I protect them when we have those extreme cold weather events. And so in my experience, we have the cold weather events pretty much every winter, but it's only a week or two, you know? And at that point, there's probably been enough deep frosts to make the plants extra tough. And if you can make it through those extreme cold weather events with 2-3 layers of that row cover, your plants are alive, and hopefully you get a few more harvests out of them before the end of the Persephone period. And then once the end of the Persephone period comes, which in our climate is February 4th, that's when the first 10-hour day of the next year begins, all the plants grow again, like I mentioned earlier. So it's just a great way to increase your nutrition in the wintertime. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to be eating just potatoes and carrots and storage crops all winter. I want fresh stuff. And it really makes winter a lot more bearable for me because I'm a geek with this stuff. I don't want it to end in November. And it just makes winter a lot less depressing. And I know my customers agree. So basically for harvesting, all I do is I harvest whatever I need for the week for all my customers. So it's no stress. In the summertime when you harvest, you're harvesting as fast as possible, everything that's growing. So you're trying to make sure that you don't lose the crop before it goes bad in some way, shape, or form. This is way less stressful as long as you get the timing right because you just harvest it whenever you need it. Nothing's growing anymore. So if I need 90 bunches of parsley, I'll get 90 bunches of parsley out of this bed for all my customers that week, and then that's how we do it. And then when the Persephone period ends, everything grows like crazy. I put a big sale out there, try and sell stuff at a discount because I won't be able to sell it all as fast that way. But the same goes for the carrots. All you got to do is when the ground is, thawed enough, because sometimes when it's cold, like -20, the ground will freeze even in your greenhouse. Once the ground is thawed, you just come in and harvest, just like you would outside. And there's no snow in here, so that's another added benefit. But, say I needed 100 bunches of carrots for a week. I just harvest 100, and that's it. There's nothing special compared to summer harvesting, but it's just the way that you look at it. So I look at all this stuff as inventory because it's just sitting there, and I just got to make sure it doesn't get too damaged in the cold. And, I try to really be aggressive harvesting the crops that I know won't take the -20. So like we've got a lot of lettuce, even cilantro, kale, that I know won't take the extreme cold. So the next 2 months, we're in November now, I'm going to go very aggressive on all those crops for the next 2 months. And then hopefully I'll still have stuff like Claytonia, spinach, probably parsley, probably carrots, maybe a little bit of kale in January to get us through. And then once February starts, everything grows again and we're in jungle mode again. And if you combine this with all the storage crops that you have from other videos I've mentioned, you got a pretty nice array of about 20 different vegetables to eat through the winter. So you combine this with storage crops, you're doing pretty well, even in a crazy cold climate like here. So basically just think of this as inventory and think of the greenhouse and all these crops as your root cellar. It's a lot cheaper, a lot more fun in my opinion. So all you gotta do is wait till the plants thaw. They're gonna freeze solid every single night, pretty much, depending on how cold it gets. Like last night, it was 15 degrees. I guarantee this was frozen solid. Now we're at about 11:30 a.m. It's thawed. I could harvest this stuff and it's totally fine. And if the crops do look a little droopy, actually these don't, but you could stick them in a glass of water and they will spring up. Like kale works great like that. So does chard, stuff like that. It all will perk up really, really nice because it's kind of just droopy because of the stress that it had from the cold. But basically that's it. Same with salad greens. And I find all of these crops have a phenomenal shelf life after they've gone through the extreme cold. There's something about the sugars being concentrated in the plants make them last a lot longer in your fridge, and they taste so much better. I've mentioned it before in other videos, but everything I'm talking about tastes 10 times better in the winter than it does in the summer because it gets sweet. The plants put sugars into their tissue and it makes them taste so much better, especially carrots. So you really want to get the carrots right. And you just can't beat it. And you know, even if you saw that you had -30 in your forecast and you didn't want to risk losing the carrots, harvest them all and then store them in your fridge for the next couple months. It's the same thing. You know, you can kind of do a little bit of both. You do a little bit of storage in your fridge and a little bit of just storing in the ground. It's just kind of making the work stretch out over a longer period of time. And, you know, it doesn't take that long to harvest, you know, 20 pounds of carrots. So it's just a really good strategy. I'd love to see more people trying it out in the north, you know, because a lot of the gardening content out there is in much warmer climates. And I've just been kind of wanting to make this content for a long time because I'd like to see more people doing it in crazy cold climates. So that's how you do it. Okay, so to show you where I got those numbers that I said in the beginning, and I'm not just blowing smoke, I want to walk you through my farm plot map and explain where those numbers came from. So here is a map of my farm, and it's going to be kind of complicated to you probably, but I'll walk you through it. It's basically an Excel sheet with every cell representing one bed, and my beds are almost all 50 feet by 2.5 feet long. And there's a couple places where they're only 40 feet, and I'll explain what that means later. And actually, some of these represent 25 feet, but let's just start here. This is our high tunnel, which I filmed some of the video in. It's a 70 foot by 30 foot wide, 72 foot by 30 foot wide high tunnel with 9 rows of 70 feet long beds. And I break them down into about 20 feet in this Excel sheet. So we have basically 4 plus 1 equals roughly 4.5 beds of spinach. And when I say beds, I'm pretty much mean 50-foot beds. And we have 1 50-foot bed of green onions, 1 50-ish feet of bok choy. That's a little weird because there's some celery planted in there and they're not all growing really well. So I'm kind of calling that a half a bed. The Tokyo Bacana mustard over here, we've got 1, 2, 3-ish beds of Tokyo Bacana. And when I say 1 bed, I'm calling 2 of these small beds 1 bed. And then we have a little bit of Claytonia in here. That's about half a bed. I actually forgot to include that in my numbers. And then we have 1 50-foot bed of arugula. So that's where those are coming from. And then we actually have some stuff in my nursery that's going to be, I'm pretty much dividing the lettuce mix yields in half of what they normally would be because we have a lot of powdery mildew on this crop. So I say we have, these are all 4 40-foot beds. That's what this represents. So each one of these cells equals 20 feet here. In the greenhouses, I break the beds down into smaller than 50 feet because they're smaller footprints than our fields and our caterpillar tunnels. And it's just easier for me because sometimes I do plant only like half of this 40-foot bed in something else. But anyway, each one of these beds I'm guessing is about 20 pounds. Normally it's at least 40, but they're really bad. It's a bad crop. So I'm guessing that they're about 20 pounds per bed. I think that's what I said here. We are going with, actually I'm going even less. We're going with 15 pounds because I think it's going to be a really bad yield. You know, that's just part of farming. Sometimes that happens. Cilantro is a straight 40-foot bed of 4 rows of cilantro, and there's going to be at least 200 bunches there. And then bok choy is a 40-foot bed, and it's planted with about 280 plants. They're all looking really good. Should be pretty close to normal yields there. So that's where we're getting those. And then the field, don't worry about that. That's not included in what I'm talking about in this video, although technically we still have about 40-50 pounds of kale in the field that's been surviving just fine, and a little bit of parsley and some carrots left as well. But I'm not including that in the numbers for this video. And then last is the caterpillar tunnels, which is most of what the video is filmed in, and each one of these cells represents one 50-foot bed, so it's a little easier for you to understand. And I'll explain the totals in the next part of my explanation here. But basically we got 2 100-foot long caterpillar tunnels that are 16 feet wide. We have fit 10 50-foot beds in each one of them. So this is probably the most valuable to you because caterpillar tunnels are a really easy way to make this happen on a homestead or even a small backyard. You know, you don't need a whole lot of land to do what I'm talking about here. So we've got 10 beds in each. They're 50 foot long. The pathways in between are 10 inches. So they're very dense. It's hard to walk around in there, but for us, it's necessary because, you know, greenhouse real estate is like Manhattan real estate. For us on the farm, it's really valuable. So every single one of these beds is pretty much fully filled with food, way better yields than last year. And so we've got a total of another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 beds of spinach in here that are all looking pretty much perfect. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 beds of carrots that are all perfect, haven't been harvested at all yet. And we've got 2 more beds of Tokyo Bacana that are looking perfect as well. And 2 beds of Claytonia, which is my absolute favorite winter green. I showed you that in the video. And 1 bed of baby kale, and 2 beds of big regular kale. Those beds of regular kale are not fully mature. I did not get the planting time right on that. You know, that's part of the learning curve with this. And then we also have a full bed of parsley. There's at least 200 bunches of parsley in there. It's absolutely jungle. It's a jungle of parsley. And then we have 1 bed of celery left. I am including that in my numbers because I don't actually consider celery to be a winter crop, but it's sort of like a fall crop that I'm pushing really late into the winter. And I'm hoping to push it into December with just 1 layer of protection. So far, it's working pretty good. We got really cold last night. It was 15, and it's still looking pretty good. So that's the farm plot map, so you could see it from a bird's eye view. And now this is the yields that will happen. And I'm approximating this. You always have to approximate with yields when you're just looking at them before you harvest. But I know from experience, these numbers are pretty accurate, and I'm being really conservative because there's a lot of problems with some things. And so hopefully my numbers are actually low here. I'm hoping that I'm actually like 20% lower than what the reality is. So, you know, it's a nice, pleasant surprise when I actually do harvest. But a lot of things go wrong all the time, so you want to plan on the low end. Anyway, so I'll just explain what we got going on here. We got our crop, 50-foot, number of 50-foot beds, which I kind of explained right there. The units we're measuring the yields in. So, you know, most of this is just by the pound, even with stuff like spinach. But, you know, the yields I normally track things in for stuff like green onions is like per 4-ounce bunch. So 1 bed will hopefully get me 200 4-ounce bunches. And I wanted to break it down like this so I could actually get a total pound of food yield at the end of this video. So hopefully that all makes sense, but I broke it all down into, you know, by unit amounts. You know, a bok choy head is about 3/4 to 1 pound. You know, the bunches of cilantro and parsley and green onions are all pretty much 4 ounces. I know that. We do that all the time. Celery heads are huge. They're at least 2 pounds each. They're very heavy. Celery is just pure water, so it's real heavy. So there's a lot of food there. Carrots are real simple. I know that one. It's always by the pound. We actually harvest those carrots by the bunch in the winter, but I know the yield is usually at least 150 pounds, and I think it's actually gonna be a lot more than that, but you know, I wanna be conservative. And then kale usually is an 8-ounce bunch. So we'll go over the total yields over here, but basically, based on my past experience, I've been doing this winter growing for 3 years now, and I'm pretty experienced with these yields, and this is basically the average yield I would get per bed on the first harvest. And I go over, you know, I'm only counting the first harvest on all of these greens because just in case we get a crazy winter and some of the stuff dies, I don't want to bank on that second harvest. So this is, again, pretty conservative. If we have a decently warm winter, we'll probably almost get double the amount in February, March, April, because all these, like almost all these crops will regrow, except for things like green onions. The celery is a one-time thing. Carrots are a one-time thing. Bok choy is a one-time thing. So, but everything else that's like a plant will regrow. And so I'm only factoring in first harvest with all of these numbers. So it could be a lot more. So we got our yield per bed. Our total yield is basically just the yield per bed times the number of beds. So we got that. And then for value, I am basically taking the total yield and multiplying it by the price that I would charge at our farmer's market, bare minimum. Carrots, $5 a pound, that might be outrageous to you, but the value of these carrots in the wintertime is off the charts. I guarantee I could sell them at that price. And they're so much sweeter than anything you've ever tasted at the store. We sell them as candy carrots. We sell, at our tiny small town market, we could sell at least 50 pounds at that price per market. And we really don't have a lot of population to sell into around here. So it's very easy to sell those through the winter at that price, and I think we might even go higher. So again, I'm going conservative on all my numbers. I'm actually hoping to bump the price up on all the greens to 12, if not more, and everything else will probably be the same. But again, I want to be conservative here. So we got our total yield, and then value is just the yield times the price, okay? So if you want to pause this video and analyze what I'm talking about, that's probably a good idea if you're really a geek like I am. Because when I first saw this kind of stuff on other people's YouTube channels, I did that. And then we got our total pounds over here, which I basically, you know, if it's just the yield times whatever the amount is over here. So basically it's going to be 1-to-1, except for things like, you know, our cilantro, we have 200 bunches. I just basically took that 200 and times it by 0.25 to divide it by 4. So that gives you 40 pounds of cilantro. I was kind of curious what the actual total pounds of this food is, because some people think in that term. You know, I don't usually think like that for the farm because I'm a business, but I was kind of curious. You know, we actually have basically over 2,400 pounds of food to harvest November through January. So I thought that was interesting. So hopefully that's not Chinese to you. I'd highly recommend, if you're a geek, to pause during what I just said and think about it. I'm going to do my best to put this in the description somehow, but I've got to figure it out so you can actually like print this off if you're really curious. But that's where I got those numbers. So if any of what I'm saying is making sense, leave me a comment down below. I'd love to know what you're thinking. And also hit those thumbs depending on whether you like or dislike this video. And if you want to grow your own food, check out my free garden starter guide at the link in the description below, where I go over how to set up a no-dig version of this farm in your backyard. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.